Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this last one. And this is Robert Winefield. Yeah, we'll do this and then we got to go. I got to record some shows here. Robert Winefield says, has this to say: care to comment on the following observation? Advocates for individual freedom try to form organizations to increase their reach and faction or. Oh. Okay, so I think I'm sorry, Robert. I'm probably just not understanding it, but it looks to me that what you're saying in the first paragraph is people who are advocates for individual freedom try to find organizations, but organizing is antithetical to people who are individualists. And that's the first part of what I'm reading as the questions. Collectivists who do the same succeed because their top-down goals dovetail with the nature of organizations. For example, GOP establishment versus conservatives in the GOP Tea Party factions, and so on. And he's got some good examples there. And he says, if I'm correct, how do we fix that? Are we doomed to have the barbarians pull Rome down around our ears? That is a superb question. That's a superb question. So the question is, if you have two different schools of thought, and you have people who are individualists and you have people who are collectivists, organizing increases the reach of either one of those philosophies, and one philosophy is antithetical to organization, and the people who are wired that way chafe at any kind of a hierarchical structure, any kind of organization that we're familiar with. And I just gave myself an interesting answer there. While the other group of people, the collectivists, are perfectly happy to form all kinds of different organizations because that's what they do. Their identity is in the group. Their identity is in the collective, not in the individual. So what do freedom-loving individuals do to fight against the fact that collectivists organize far better than we do? I think I just accidentally stumbled on the answer, Robert. Yes, I did. The way we beat this is we have to rethink what an organization is. We can't change our natures. We can't tell people who don't like to be told what to do that they're going to have to like to be told what to do in order to be able to live so that they don't have to be told what to do. It's just not going to happen. So we have to change the nature of organizations, and that's actually helping us in a big way because the left and the collectivists are very top-down. They're very centralized. They're very hierarchical, very structured. They call themselves a bunch of wandering hippies, but when you get down to the hardcore people, the Bolsheviks were the most over-organized group in the history of the world, with the possible exception of the National Socialists. And when you've got a giant collectivist government like that, everything has to be stamped, everything has to be approved, everything has to be written in triplicate. Just the paperwork alone chokes all of the, forget the productivity out of society, chokes all the fun out of it too. So collectivists do tend to organize hierarchically better than individualists do. That's true. So we have to change the nature of organizations. And what we do by that is we get rid of top-down organizations and we get rid of structure. I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms. The very term organize, to organize something comes from your internal organs. It means rather than being filled with a bunch of goo, we've got some of the goo that does one thing well and not another thing. The heart doesn't filter urine, and the liver doesn't process oxygen. They are organized. They are compartmentalized, reduced, specialized, and compartmentalized is what organization means. So how do you have an organization without that? How do you have an organization without structure? And in other words, how do you have an organization that individualists could be comfortable with? And the answer is, I think, is that you start off with the idea that there is no hierarchy and that there is no structure and that there are no there are no above you, below you relationships that I'll qualify that in a minute. That nobody comes in at the bottom of a pyramid and works their way up, that no one is promoted beyond somebody else because they're curried favor, and all the rest of the things that we individualists just can't stand. So if you think of an organization like a government, you got the president, you've got the Congress, you've got all the bureaus, you've got the heads of the departments, you've got the deputy heads of the departments, you've got all the people who are middle managers, and then you've got the standing army of all the people doing all the work. It's very vertical and it's very clear. But because of the information age, because of computers, Robert, it's possible to think about things this way. It's possible to think about think about it this way. You as an individual have a series of skills. You probably work a job, or maybe you're retired. Now you don't look retired from your icon. In any event, most people have a job, and that's their identity, and that's what they do. I'm a political commentator. My fiance is a photographer. Some people are telephone linemen, and so on and so on and so on. But that's a very old way of looking at things, because we're all actually more than that. There are a number of things that I can do well enough to get paid for them, and this is probably second or third. And that's true for most people. So if you begin to look at people differently and start looking at them not as bricks, but probably as molecules, a brick goes into position and there it stays. It is cemented there. Molecules assemble themselves from atoms, and then they can also be broken down and go back to kind of the soup of molecules. So what I think we're going to see happening, regardless of whether we want it to happen or not, is this. When we have the ability to do what we're doing now, when we have the ability to connect individually on a one-to-one basis, then if everybody has that ability, let's just say for the sake of the argument, that everybody has the ability to be connected to everybody else, then what you will find is individuals can go into a system like that as individuals, and the organization will arise completely organically. Sorry, that's not the word I wanted. It will happen completely. It will happen in an unordered, unpredetermined fashion. People with certain skills will find other people working on a project that they personally find interesting. They'll attach themselves to that project, and that working group may be one working group, and people might be in parts of other working groups, and so on and so on and so on. This is the whole idea of the common sense resistance, actually. So you don't have to worry about the problems that individuals have with hierarchies. You're not the boss of me. Well, you're not the boss of me. No one's keeping you here, and we don't have a promotion schedule. You're coming into this as an individual with a set of skills. The problem requires a certain set of skills. The problem probably requires that certain people are able to give orders to other people, but you're joining voluntarily, and you're not taking a knee, and you don't have to. You get the general idea. So it's possible. In fact, I think it's likely that the Organization for Freedom-Loving People will be organizations that don't have any vertical structure. And they're much harder to kill, by the way. A headless organization is very, very tough to kill. I think the book is called The Spider and the Starfish, something like that. A very, very good book on this subject. Really got me thinking about it. And basically what it says is if you cut the leg off a spider, you've now got a 7-leg spider. But if you cut the leg off a starfish, the starfish will regrow the leg, and the leg will regrow the starfish. So this was the example that they used between these two different kind of things, where one thing has got a head and extensions, and the other thing's basically just this giant organism that can reproduce itself. So the example he used was Napster. You guys remember Napster from back in the day? So basically, the example that these authors gave was this. You have finally got the internet, and you've got the ability to basically send large amounts of data back and forth without going through a hierarchical system. And the reason Napster basically started to work was this. Somebody realized that since music is digital now, and since it can be downloaded and uploaded, somebody said, why do I have to buy all the albums that I want? Why don't I simply buy a couple of albums, upload those albums, trade them with people who have some music that I want, and then that way they get the music they want, I get the music I want. I only have to pay for, in the initial trade, half, but as time goes on, a microscopic portion of the amount of music you could get. You pay, $5-6 and get essentially unlimited music. So once people realized that this was a possibility, And it does show the leg really does grow the starfish. You see the video of it, it's just shocking. In any event, so there's Napster. Now, Napster, and in fact, the whole idea of internet downloads is practically fatal to the music industry, at least as we understood it, in the same way that digital copies of DVDs and bootlegging movies has really hurt the film industry. But so basically what happened was the recording studios and the artists, all the people who owned the music, thought, wait a minute now, here's 15, 20 people, 50 people, 100 people with my music, and only one guy paid for them. That's not right. And it's not right. So the law was on their side. So what they did was they basically, all of this stuff was coordinated through Napster and Napster servers, and you had to log on to Napster and do all the rest of it. So they basically went after Napster. And what they did was they shut Napster down. And they prosecuted a few people pretty heavily so that people realized if somebody else wanted to start this kind of a centralized music warehouse, then they were likely to get in trouble. And so that didn't end the problem. It just meant that the structure became non-centralized. There was software that allowed people to talk to other individuals. You didn't have to upload to Napster and download to Napster. You could basically connect to individuals and just swap them back and forth. And then there were other systems that were even more dispersed. And every time that the establishment went to attack the problem of music piracy, they created a new organization, and each time they did it, it got tougher and tougher and tougher to kill because it's more and more and more dispersed. You can shut down Napster. You can't shut down email. If I want to email you a tune, it'd be virtually impossible to stop me, but then the problem is how many people do I want to email tunes to? So in any event, this is a good example of a structure that started out in kind of a traditional way and then went to a non-traditional way. And the example I always use, I'll use it one more time, then we're done for the night, is something that I saw happen in real time right in front of my eyes. It's absolutely amazing. It was in 2004, and about 3 weeks before the election, the October surprise was, Dan Rather does this report, and basically the report says that George Bush, who was running for re-election in 2004, George Bush was AWOL. He left his position in the Texas Air National Guard without permission, and they had a letter to prove it. So basically, 2-3 weeks before the election, CBS News is dropping this bombshell that George W. Bush was either a coward or maybe he was drunk or whatever. He was AWOL. He wasn't worthy of the respect of the military or anybody else for that matter. He basically ran away from his duty. And this was all predicated on a letter that came from the, whatever it was, 11163rd, I want to say, Air Wing or whatever it was. So this was the evidence, this letter that CBS News has uncovered. And sure enough, the letter looked like it was, was happened back in 1967, 68, something like that. It looked like an old letter. And if you just glance at it, you think, wow, that's pretty compelling evidence. But this is where the unstructured organization really happened in an amazing, amazing thing. So CBS was stupid enough to post that letter on its website as evidence. Here's the proof. You don't have to take our word for it that George Bush is a coward and a slacker and a layabout. Here's the letter. Here's your evidence. So the evidence is up there for the public to see. Now that means that millions of people are looking at this letter, or certainly thousands anyway in the beginning, and you've got thousands of people with different perspectives and so on. And one guy on Free Republic, guy's name was Buckeye. Buckeye looked at this letter, and he realized that when it referred to Bush's group, let's say it was the 1160, let's say it was the 168th, whatever it was. There's a number like that. But he looked at the letter that was supposedly written in 1968 or something, and it was a 168 and then TH, but the TH was raised and very small, the way that it would appear on a computer. If you ever used a typewriter, you know that the way you write 168th is 168th, full size T, full size H. And this guy just looked at it and said, that's not from 1968. That's what computers do. It's a fake. And now this thing is happening so fast. So people are connecting on this thing. I mean, it really happened in a couple of hours. So back before he lost his mind, Charles Johnson was on the side of the good guys, and he was a graphic designer. So Charles Johnson sees this post that Buckeye makes. It's making the rounds now because we're in a political war here, and we're almost at showtime. And somebody says, that's right. And a lot of people saying, that's right, we got him. So then what Charles Johnson does is he basically takes the contents of the letter, he types it into Microsoft Word with the default settings. He doesn't change anything. He puts a typewriter font in there. He doesn't change the margins, doesn't do anything. He puts it in, types it up, prints it out, and then he does a GIF comparison or a GIF comparison, whatever you want. A basic, here's the old picture. Here's the one I just printed out in 2004. Here's the one that claimed from 60, one on top of the other. And when they flash them back one on top of the other, you realize they're absolutely identical. But the one that's older has been aged and it's blurrier and it's got dust on it and all the rest of it. But they were absolutely identical. So now you've got two people in on this. You got Buckeye who found the problem. You got Charles Johnson who's proving that it was done on a computer. And then the Buckhead, sorry, not Buckeye, thanks Steve, it was Buckhead. Now the third step kicks in. Dan Rather and the Democrats fight back and they say, whoa, I mean, they're caught. They're really in trouble and they know it. So they were saying, well, it's true that you couldn't, but there was a typewriter in 1968 that would do the small uppercase TH. Really? Yeah. Well, it was like $150,000 and it was used in, print shops, graphic design shops. So it kind of makes you wonder why major or whatever, lieutenant colonel at a Quonset hut in Texas in the middle of nowhere in 1968, what is that guy doing with a $150,000 typesetting computer and writing, run-of-the-mill memos on it? It doesn't make any sense. So then they gave that up, and then they finally said something to the effect of it could be done by using a certain ball or something on the IBM Selectric. That's the part I'm still hazy on. But the part I'm not hazy on is this. Somebody said the IBM Selectric or something, some form of the IBM typewriter could in fact have done it in 1968 or whenever the year was. And then somebody said, no, it couldn't. It could not have done it. And basically people said, well, who are you? And this guy said, I'm the chief engineer of the IBM Selectric. I'm the guy who built it, designed it. And I'm telling you, you can't do it. And so that's another expert that attached himself to this. Nobody said, hey, we got to find the guy who designed the IBM Selectrics. Nobody said, we got to find somebody to overlay these things. People just came to the party with a skill set and they applied them, and I think it saved the election, and I think it was the first step in the destruction of mainstream news media. Dan Rather to this day claims that it's authentic. Dan Rather is he's simply lost his mind. Dave Big Booty was saying fake but accurate, and that's where they were finally left to leave this thing. Well, it's okay, so maybe this letter is a fake, but George Bush certainly won AWOL. Well, how do you know? Because we don't like him. Well, where's your evidence? We don't have any evidence except for this evidence that we had to fake. That's where you are with the left. So you can't form organizations that are not anathema to people who are individualists, and that's, I think, the hope for the future for us.